holding here a golden spike, actually driven out at Lang Station. And this was the spike, of course, that united Northern with Southern California. So if you go rushing out to Lang looking for a gold spike, forget it. We've got it here. Around me, we're trying to recreate the way train station ticket offices would have looked in the 1880s, 90s, early 1900s. And moving from one end of this to the other, the desk is authentic, 1920s. These are the switches which you could move back and forth in order to change the rails outside, switching trains from one track to another. We have a number of log books and timetables here. Back in the corner, the scales used for weighing packages. The typewriter has an interesting history. It was used by One Bull, the nephew and adopted son of the famous Sioux chief Sitting Bull. One Bull wrote the reminiscences of his illustrious ancestor on this particular typewriter. This is where the tickets were kept. Down here is a telegraph key, telephone, and of course a radio that you could turn on and perhaps listen to Amos and Andy or I Love a Mystery, Glenn Miller. And what is out of sight down here in the corner is the bell off of the engine from outside. I'll give you a little taste of what it sounds like. How was that? And again, out of sight, the old switchboard back up here on the corner. Well, thank you for visiting the Sauga station. Hope you can come back again sometime.
Jerry and I are here in front of the Pioneer Oil Refinery in Newhall. This was the first refinery built west of Pennsylvania. Jerry, why don't you tell us a little bit about it, if you don't mind?
Well, the refinery started actually in 1876. There was a small two-barrel refiner, two-still refinery over at Lyons Station. That shortly went out of business. They were unable to produce smoke-free kerosene. 2 years later, Demetrius G. Schofield came down from San Francisco. He was at the time general manager of the California Star Oil Company, which was the big operator in California at that time. There was oil pouring out of these canyons, you might say, out of Pico Canyon, out of Towsley, out of Placerita, and the railroad came through just to the east of us here, about a quarter of a mile from where we're sitting. This was an ideal spot to locate a refinery, and so they built it. 1878 is when it was completed. They used the two existing stills from Lyons Station and brought two more out from Pennsylvania. The work was under the direction of John A. Scott. Scott was a refiner in Titusville, Pennsylvania, and really knew what he was doing. He had a lot of good Eastern expertise. So no sooner were they completed than they began production, and by George, they were showing a profit. This was about the first time California Star Oil really showed a profit. The company, of course, was based in San Francisco. In time, the refinery was phased out. What they did was they settled all of their refining at Alameda Point, and this just sort of fell into rack and ruin. Demetrius G. Schofield later became the first president of Standard Oil of California, which is now known as Chevron USA. When Schofield died, they thought it might be nice to restore these old stills as a monument to Mr. Schofield, and so they are dedicated to him. While this used to be called the Newhall Refinery, it's now called the Pioneer Refinery, and it is the oldest existing refinery anywhere in the world today. And that pretty much brings us up to date.
Sitting here on this site, which is accessible off of Railroad Avenue to the general public at no admission charge every day of the year, you should stop by and take a look at this. It's really, really a monument to Mr. Schofield. We're standing here in front of a home built in the late 1800s by Charles Alexander Mentry. This house is located in the upper edge of Pico Canyon. The lady who lives in this house is Carol Lagasse. Carol, why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the unusual features of the house?
Good morning, Tom. Well, the house was built in the late 1800s. Mr. Mentry had two other houses built here before he built this one, which is the reason it was built in so much later than when the other things were going on in the canyon. The house has 13 large rooms and 4 sitting rooms. It is built all out of redwood. Some of the unusual things is gas fireplaces, which they usually were wood. But Mr. Mentry did not want the wood to be cut down. And of course, the gas comes from the original gas well, which we also use today. It has large bathtubs and, of course, clothes closets, which was very unusual in those days because most of them used wardrobes or armoires. Several of the things that Mr. Mentry planted are still standing here, such as the olive trees and the eucalyptus trees. Also, he had planted several rose bushes, and they are still here.
What is this out in front of the, next to the steps here, this little platform, Carol?
This is where the stagecoach came twice a day from Newhall. I understand that they had a bakery here and that baked goods was delivered from here twice a day by the stagecoach.
Now, also, I think we were talking earlier, didn't you say that there were a number of very important visitors and famous people that have been here?
Yes, by some of the, by a scrapbook that was Mrs. Mentry's, I had seen that senators and representatives were from Washington here. We have shown the house to over 30,000 first-time visitors, and we have tours all year round. Many school children come here also.
That's wonderful. Why don't we go and look at some of the other features here in Mentryville?
Okay.
Thank you. Just up the canyon from the home built by Charles Mentry here in Mentryville is the Felton School. Carol, who was the school named after?
The school was named in honor of Charles N. Felton, who later became a senator from California. The school was built in 1885. Of course, it's all out of redwood also. It has the original one-room schoolhouse, but later they added 2 other rooms, so the entry hall and the library. We have on the outside the little wash house that the children used to use for washing their hands and also getting their water. Sometimes I understand they also used it for having water fights. Then, of course, we have the 2 outdoor toilets, one for the boys and one for the girls.
Now, can we go into the schoolhouse today?
I think that'd be fun. Let's try.
Fine, let's go. We're now inside of the Felton School, which was originally lighted with these. This is one of the original gas lamps. Also, gas was used to heat the schoolhouse, which is fairly rare, but in an area where gas is produced, it's quite common. Carol, how many students did they have in a school this size?
Well, one of the school teachers, which we know of 5, told me that she had 11 pupils as her students. I do understand that from one of the teachers, she said she had 13, so that was about the most children they had. The small desks are for the younger children, and the larger desk was for the older children.
Well, now, when they were having school in this schoolhouse, and all the grades were within the one room, using either the taller or the shorter desk. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. She showed me a schedule that she had, and every 15 minutes they changed lessons. And she said some of the younger children would also listen to the older children, and they actually caught up with them and was able to advance in their grades by listening to the other children.
This is the way early education was here in the Santa Clarita Valley. Interesting, isn't it? We're standing here in front of the oldest continuously producing commercial oil well in the world today. This well was drilled somewhere in the 1800s. And how was it drilled, Frenchy, and what year was it drilled?
In 1875, they drilled it first with spring poles. And right in front of this casing here, they had 2 other little casings, which we plugged off years ago. But it was deepened in 1876 with the cable tool and steam. And they was able to improve the production from 2 barrels up to about 22 barrels a day, which was a substantial increase in production.
Well, now, do I understand correctly that with a spring pole, it's actually man-powered? That's how the hole was forced into the ground?
Yes, it was 1 man on each side of the pole pounding this cable down in with a bit, and a bucket type thing, and it would bring out the dirt that way. It's very, very slow, and it can only go a certain amount of depth.
Mm-hmm. You were saying that the well is now producing about a barrel a day for its 4 hours that it's actually run each day. Is that enough to commercially pay for the well?
Yes, the cost of electricity and running it with a more modern unit here, it still comes out as a profitable venture.
That's wonderful, and you've seen it right here in the Santa Clarita Valley. We're standing here in front of a replica of one of the wells that was originally here in Pico Canyon. Frenchy, what can you tell us about are the iron parts here reproductions, or is this original equipment?
This is all original equipment. The steam engine and the bowl wheel are all original equipment. The only thing that is a duplication is the wood in the derrick. The derricks was built exactly like this, in the same shape, and most of them were taller than this.
What gave people first the idea of getting oil out here? Was it the Indians? Did it start with the Indians?
Yeah, the Indians used to come from as far away as Catalina Island, and they would gather the oil that would seep out of the ground in skins. And then they would take it out and trade it with other tribes, or else they used it to mix with mud to waterproof their huts, or they line their baskets with it so they could carry fluids, liquids, or water in the baskets.
Now let's see. We were talking about the oil gathering. Oil gathering was oil that came to the surface of the ponds and then was skimmed off at the top. Is that how they would gather it?
Yeah, that's correct.
Now, what else? Is there anything else that's unique about the oil in this canyon?
Yes, the oil in this canyon is different than most oil in our area because it's green in color, and it is higher gravity oil. When they first started producing, it was 38 gravity, but now it's down to 36 gravity, and it's almost a consistency of diesel fuel.
In other words, what you're saying is with the gravity of oil, the lighter the product, the higher number of gravity, and the more toward the tar end, the lower the gravity. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Right here in the Santa Clarita Valley, can you believe it? Indians gathering oil.
Well, here we are in downtown Newhall at Market and Walnut Street, once the site of the sumptuous Southern Hotel built by Henry M. Newhall. The hotel burned in 1888, and there's no trace of it left today. A year before the hotel burned, in '87, Henry Clay Needham arrived. He was sort of the personal emissary of Governor St. John of Kansas. Both of them were very influential in the Prohibition Party. In fact, St. John was their candidate for president on several occasions. Needham bought up the old Lion Station property, which is now Eternal Valley Cemetery, and became quite a leading citizen in the community. He built several homes, including the old schoolhouse and this one that we're standing at now. It started out around 1888 or 1899 as the Good Templars Lodge. Later was sold to Ed Pardee. Pardee came down from Pico Canyon, where he had been an oil driller with Mentry and all that gang out there. This was the Pardee home for a great number of years and really a social center of the community. After the Pardee elders died, the building went to their daughter, Pearl Pardee, later known as Pearl Pardee Russell, who was the Grand Dam of Newhall in the early days. Later, the Pardees sold the property to the telephone company. This was the Telephone Exchange Building until it was taken over by the Boys and Girls Club of the Santa Clarita Valley. Today, it's the Chamber of Commerce office, and it's still sort of a social center, even as it was in the days of the Pardees.
We're right in the middle of downtown Newhall, standing in front of the first jail in town. This building is no longer used as a jail, but used as an attorney's office. Kind of a fitting end use for an old jail, I'd say. This building dates back to the early 1900s, we feel. There's no actual documentation that we've been able to find to pin the date down very close. But from the reinforcing bar, or lack of reinforcing bar, and plain steel sucker rod, which was occasionally used in that day, we know that this building dates back till to the early 1900s. We have with us to tell us some of the stories of what went on in that day and age, Darrell Haskell. Darrell, what can you tell us about the law enforcing and the things that went on around this building and your memories of it?
Well, the law enforcing, man, there weren't very many officers as such like we know today. But so they had small arsenals, you might say, like I can speak for the one in Saugus. And if a desperado or something came up, well, they would just deputize people right on the site, hand them a gun and say, go get them. And of course, then when they made an arrest in Saugus, why, in the mid-20s, Johnny Seltzer would call Newhall, and a Mr. Pilcher would come down, pick up the prisoner, and bring him down to this jail and put him there for overnight or until arrangements were made to handle him otherwise. And
are there any other stories about law enforcing you can tell us?
Oh, yes. One time they telegrammed through that Hickman, who had kidnapped the little Parker girl downtown Los Angeles, was riding blind baggage on the Owl that came through at night. So Zoom, they made a stop with the train on purpose, and then they were there to flush him out, and they beat it. It turned out it wasn't Hickman, but it was another desperado, and they chased him and captured him, and he was wanted for a robbery or something. And then, of course, one time, I believe he was Ed Brown, and he was a law officer, and he was called up what we call Railroad Canyon to the scene and to pick up someone who was kind of making a little nuisance of himself from an old family who was part Indian. And this Gus, I'll call him, Gus shot and killed Ed Brown. So they gathered up the posse and went up after him. Instead of taking him peacefully, why, they shot and killed him right there. And then I can remember as they came back, the posse, as they came back, they said they didn't bother to pick him up immediately. They just said, leave him lie, let the buzzards have him. But of course, cooler heads prevailed, and within a few hours they went up and picked up the body.
From all the stories I hear, the town was pretty rough in those days. You read about the various gangsters who came through town and the various things that went on. It definitely was like an old western, wasn't it?
Oh, definitely. And of course, a lot of everything was virtually hay orientated, because that's what fed the horses that pulled the carts and one thing and another. My father was one time loading hay right there where the old depot was, and now there's later was the mud shack, the McWhorter Supply. He was there loading a carload of hay out, and the main street faced the railroad tracks in those days. And he looked across, and here came a fellow running out who had his jugular vein, but he came out and died right in front of my father.
Wow, it really was the days of the Old West.
It was pretty rough, yeah. And the fella inside had broken a beer bottle and just whacked him right across the jugular vein, but he had enough, even at that, he had enough strength to get up and run, and died right in the main street, which was then facing the railroad track.
Many things like that happened in this area in those days. Perhaps we can go in and look at the inside of the jail now. Come along.
Tom and Daryl have a certain aversion to coming into jails for some reason or another, so they asked me to pick this up here. We really don't know how old this building is. It was certainly around at the turn of the century, and how some of our more leading citizens at the time. I remember Lloyd Houghton telling the story of him wandering down the street one day, and one of his close friends was in here, and the friend leaned out the window. You could in those days, everything was open, and said, "Hey, Lloyd, you got a match?" And Houghton said, "Oh, sure." The guy said, "I'd sure like to have a smoke." And Lloyd said, "Okay, fine," gave him a match, went ambling on down the road. And a little while later, coming back, he noticed the jail was on fire. Seems the guy had thrown a match in a pile of clothes and in the process of burning the place down. But then life in the little communities like that were quite different than they are today. In fact, there used to be two sets of laws, one for those that lived over on the other side of the hill and for those that lived here. For example, if you were caught drunk driving and the sheriff knew you, or the constable, he would take you home, and probably your wife would give you a rougher time than the judge would anyway. If, however, however you were from LA or San Fernando or out of town, this is where you ended up, in here. And some of the people left some interesting little calling cards on the walls back up here. Up on the walls are all sorts of interesting little comments and initials, people's names. There's one up there that says something about, I think, Pitcher, Oklahoma. Somebody named Clemens, who was a guest here, and 84 that you can make out. I'm not sure if that's the date or not, or maybe some guy was 84 years old, or maybe it was his magical number or whatnot. We really don't know when this building was constructed. It's heavy concrete and certainly dates back to the turn of the century, if not before. And I think what is interesting to me, at any rate, is that the fact that you could chisel something into the wall. So they came in here, that is, with something hard enough, a knife, a screwdriver, a belt buckle, or whatever. And I'm sure that today the sheriffs wouldn't allow you in a jail cell with something hard enough that you could chisel into solid concrete with. This is now an office of a Newhall attorney, Al Holt, who practices law here, which seems fitting in the old constable and sheriff's office, and of course the jail. The constables out here in the early days, that is, we had a constabulary from the 1870s to 1926 when the sheriffs were established, were generally busy not with so much with things around here, but some of the things in the outlying districts. For example, they used to go around up to Sandburg all the time on the Ridge Route and arrest people for gambling up there and other things. Also, they had a lot of trouble during the 20s. This was the time of Prohibition, you'll recall, when people weren't supposed to be drinking alcohol. Well, these hills, it seems, were just a forest of illegal cookers where they made moonshine whiskey. And one of the more interesting, I think, of the escapades that occurred out here was a truck. And on the back of the flatbed was a cooker for alcohol, big copper tubings and stills and everything sitting out there. Well, every time the sheriffs or the constables got a line on where this cooker was, all they had to do was just drive it up to Lake Hughes, and they couldn't find it. They had a little trouble, too, in 1921. The Jenks Harris bandits robbed the Piru State Bank and ran over to Castaic, where they were eventually captured by a local fellow named Constable Pilcher. Pilcher was an interesting character. He was a constable, and during his long career, he was involved in a number of shootouts. One of the more interesting ones is right here on this desk. This is the full and complete report that had to be made out on September 14, 1924, and this involved the death not only of a, well, in those days they didn't refer to them by the polite terms that we do today, desperado, but also of his own deputy, Ed Brown. It seems that a fellow had been bothering a lady up in Railroad Canyon, and Constable Pilcher and his deputy Brown went up to tell the guy to, lay off the girl. She's interested in you. When they got there, the fellow started shooting at them, so they returned fire, and within the next half hour, some 50 bullets had been tossed around Railroad Canyon. When it was over, the culprit was dead, and so was Ed Brown. This is a photograph of Deputy Constable Brown, taken about a year before his death, and you can see they didn't wear uniforms in those days. They did have big badges, though, and you can certainly see the gun he's carrying, and that's what told you that he was a cop. Otherwise, you wouldn't know. Curious thing about Ed Brown, which you would never hear of today in L.A. Police Department, that's for sure. His funeral was conducted by the Ku Klux Klan. As for Constable Pilcher, it seems he and another deputy had gone up San Francisco Canyon because there was a report of a break-in in one of the ranches up there. Well, the constable and his deputy arrived. They checked everything over. It seemed to be quite all right. Just as they were leaving, this immense lizard, must have been an alligator lizard, went running across the floor, and the two men bent over to look at it. It went under a bed, and as they were bending down, the deputy constable's pistol fell out of his shoulder holster and landed on the ground. His second had hit, it discharged, it threw a bullet into Pilcher's head, and they said he was dead before he hit the ground. And this is kind of interesting, isn't it? A man who had survived shootouts in the Old West, gun running and prohibition here in the Newhall area, to be killed, you might say, by his own deputy, an accident, and a mighty big lizard.
Standing here on the porch of the Walker cabin in Placerita State Park. With me today I have Melba Walker Fisher, who was born here in this canyon several years ago. Melba, why don't you tell us a little about your family in the canyon here?
Oh, yes, okay. It was quite interesting, and approximately 1920 was the year that my father built this little cabin. And so, of course, I was the sixth in the family to be born, but and I was born about 1 mile up the canyon. And so we lived here for many years after that. And okay.
Melba, there's a story that I've heard that you tell about Vasquez when he came through the canyon here one night. Would you like to tell us that story, please?
Yes, it was quite interesting. My grandfather, Joseph Rainier, who lived approximately up the canyon about 2 miles from here, one night was awakened by the dogs barking unusually loud, and a different kind of a bark when they used to bark at the coyotes. So my grandfather got out of bed and looked out the window, and coming down the road was a suspicious-looking character whom he had never seen before. And the man got off of his horse, tied the horse to the gate, and walked through the gate carrying a large rifle. So as he walked up the steps of the porch, instead of knocking on the door, he took his rifle and banged it on the floor of the porch. So, of course, my grandfather came right on out, and Vasquez introduced himself and said, "Do you know who I am?" And my grandfather said, "Well, no, I do not." And he said, "Well, I am Vasquez the outlaw." And he says, "I've been riding for many hours, and I'm very tired, and I'm hungry. Will you please have your wife get out of bed and prepare me a meal?" So they said, "Well, it'll take a while because she would have to light the old wood stove in order to cook." And he said, "Well, now the weather's been very dry, and there was no water to water my horse. So will you please take my horse over to the watering trough and water him? And while your wife prepares the meal, then I will lie down on this old cot which was on the porch and take a little siesta. So you wake me up when the meal is prepared," and which they did. And of course, this was all done in Spanish. My grandfather could not speak English, and of course, Vasquez was Spanish, and my father could speak and understand fluent Spanish, so they did get along quite nicely. And so he stopped a few other times after that before he was captured. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very interesting story, Melba.
We're on the front porch of William S. Hart's retirement home, high on a windy hill overlooking the community of Newhall. Certainly the resident expert on William S. Hart is a fellow who goes by the name of Buffalo Jim Yapel. Gives tours through the place and is presently the president of the Friends of Hart Park Association. Let's see if Jim's around. There he is. How you doing, Jim?
Pretty good, Jerry.
Well, as I mentioned, you're the expert on Hart, and you might want to give a few choice words on where William S. Hart came from, his career, and why he came to settle here in Newhall in this truly magnificent home.
Yeah, thank you, Jerry. His full name was William Surrey Hart. He was born on December 6, 1864 in Newburgh, New York. However, his early life was spent out west, the wild and woolly West, and which at that time in the early 70s would be Wisconsin and Minnesota, and he made one excursion into South Dakota. However, the country was pretty well unsettled, and this is where he acquired his interest in the Western lore. He spent probably until his 13th year out west, and then he returned to New York City and subsequently became an actor on a legitimate stage, doing all the Shakespeare things, and even became a cowboy on the stage. And he was sort of typecast after his first role as Cash Hawkins in The Squaw Man. He was typecast, and it was just one cowboy role after another until he went into movies. In 1914, he discovered a new art form, motion pictures, and decided he wanted to be a part of that. So he talked his way into the motion picture business, and in the next 11 years made about 68 to 70 films. Not all westerns, however. Some of them dealt with other subjects, but the westerns were definitely his most popular films. His last film was called Tumbleweeds, and it was released just prior to Christmas in 1925. And Hart was about 60, just past his 61st birthday. So he decided to retire and go into a period where he could rest up. This getting up every morning and doing all this writing and everything was quite a project. So he decided to retire, and he'd bought the land that we're standing on here in 1921. He had about 230 acres originally, and we've added some property to it since. But it was quite a nice piece of property, and he and his sister designed this house and had it built, and it was finished in 1928, and they moved in. Bill lived here the next 18 years of his life, and when he passed away, he wanted his fans to have the property back, so he selected Los Angeles County as custodian for his fans and willed the property to Los Angeles County. Now, we maintain it as a museum, a William S. Hart museum. It's filled with his personal belongings and his personal art collection of Western art. We have all of the better-known Western artists on display. There's some 18 paintings by the famous cowboy artist Charlie Russell here in the house. So we do our darndest to keep the place together, and it's quite an entertaining museum to visit. The park also boasts a barnyard that's filled with all kinds of exotic animals that we have a lot of the inner city children come up here to see a cow, so, you know, a three-dimensional cow and a three-dimensional horse rather than just a picture of one.
Well, thanks very much, Jim. And of course, there were a great number of well-known stars up here at one time or another visiting Mr. Hart. I think he served more or less like a consultant, you might say, in a lot of films. And I know I've seen pictures of Will Rogers and Barbara Stanwyck and many others up here at one time or another.
Standing here on the edge of the Placerita Road, just below Placerita Park, I have with me Lorraine LaSalle Brunzel, whose family has lived in this area forever. Lorraine, like myself, was born in Newhall. Both of us are here looking down into the Disney Ranch, the Golden Oak Ranch, and we're going to talk about the movie industry as it was here in Newhall in the past and as it is here now. Lorraine, did you tell me that you had actually worked here at Golden Oak Ranch at one time?
Yes, I did. I worked here on a Johnny McBrown picture, doubling the leading lady.
Many of the westerns were filmed here. In fact, most of the westerns were filmed here within the Placerita Canyon. Part of the films were done here on Disney Ranch, and the other part done down on what at that time was known as Monogram Ranch, which is now Melody Ranch and is owned by Gene Autry. Now, out on the ranch, out in the edge of Highway 99, as it was called then, Interstate 5 as it's called now, on the LaSalle Ranch, didn't they use a lot of your dad's cattle and things for movies?
Yes, they did. They used his cattle and his horses, and we girls wrangled the cattle and the horses. On that, Harry Carey made a lot of pictures up there, Tom Mix, Johnny McBrown, Tom Tyler. There was a lot of the old westerns made up there on the ranch.
That's interesting. It's interesting to have an eyewitness to these things here with us today. Perhaps we should go down the canyon a ways and look at the old Melody Ranch, or the now Melody Ranch, the old Monogram Ranch, and we'll talk a little bit more about the industry down there, okay?
Sounds good.
We're now standing in front of the Melody Ranch, which is now owned by Gene Autry Enterprises. At one time, this was Monogram Ranch, but that's been back a while, wasn't it?
Yes, it has.
This was probably the heart of the movie industry for many, many years here in the canyon. Monogram shot here many, many days a week.
Sometimes they were working 6 and 7 days a week up here.
Then you also worked here in the commissary, didn't you, when Chuck Hayes owned the...
Yes, I did. And I also drove a team of horses on the street here when I was 12 years old.
Wow. You can see behind us here the little Spanish village that's been here for years. The main street was burned in a fire some years back and has never been replaced, and probably never will be replaced. Another example of what went on in our community here in the years past. Here's one of the chunks of the St. Francis Dam disaster. We're about a half a mile below the face of where the dam once stood, and this rock was propelled by water down through the canyon. Watch along here, and you'll see some of the other rocks that are along the edges of this little valley. And if you look high up on the hill, you can see that straight line across, which is the top of the dam. A very impressive sight from here.
If you drive up San Francisco Canyon about 9 miles from its junction with Saco, you'll find this odd-looking clump of what looks like rocks from the road. Driving by, you probably wouldn't even pay any attention to it. It just looks very much like part of the natural landscape. But this is the base, or what is left, of the St. Francis Dam that collapsed in 1928. Sort of have to imagine this monument, you might say, towering 170 feet ahead over my head, the stair steps down the front of it. And then, of course, that dreadful night in 1928 when the dam finally collapsed, sending a wall of water clear up to the tops of these canyons, cascading down the hillside. Nobody knows how many people were killed in the disaster, perhaps 500. In its wake, communities of Saugus, of Peru, of Fillmore, and Santa Paula lay devastated. It finally emptied after 5.5 hours into the Pacific Ocean near Ventura. Behind it, perhaps $13 million worth of damage, but that's 1928 prices, which really don't apply to today. After the waters finally drained out of the dam, there was a great column standing here, a sort of squared off monument, the center section of the dam. The city Department of Water and Power decided it would be a great safety hazard, so they came in and dynamited and air chiseled what was left of it. So now it's just sort of a what do you call it? A pile, a monument to a disaster. But for me, nothing really brings the story of the St. Francis Dam home as a little cemetery located a couple of miles below us, known as the Ruiz Cemetery, and that's where we're going now. After the dam collapsed, nobody knows how many people were killed in the tragedy. Guesses put it at about 500. Nothing really brings it home as this little cemetery up in San Francisco Canyon, where 6 members of the Ruiz family, all killed with the same date, March 13, 1928. A few days after the dam collapsed, a little party from Newhall came up here, headed by the Reverend Evans from the Presbyterian Church and William S. Hart, the great cowboy actor. Hart actually did the ceremonies, officiating, and in the middle of it broke into tears and couldn't continue any longer. The Ruiz Cemetery is a very, very old one, graves dating back well into the 1880s. And nobody knows for sure exactly how many families are buried here. Many of the old tombstones don't even have names on them anymore. And in some places, depressions or just markers or piles of stone are remembrances of people who once lived here. I think really fascinating is one of the Nebe Ruiz, who was born in 1795 and passed away in 1905. 120 years old. In a moment, we'll take a look at that tombstone. Next to the tree is a bench for people to sit, contemplate, and perhaps visit with their ancestors that are buried here today. Of course, the cemetery is very old. There are other people besides Ruiz's buried here. There's Cordovas, there's Lebruns, a lot of the old names in the Santa Clarita Valley. This one in front of me is Nebez Ruiz. She was born in 1794 and died in 1904. Isn't that remarkable? 110 years old. Others are buried in the fences here, and in back of us are the Pereiras family. Some beautiful old monuments. People who currently own this place are the Pontons of San Francisco Canyon, and they've had some curious experiences living up here in the old cemetery or near, but I'm going to have a word with them in just a minute. The old Ruiz Cemetery is up on a hill far above the floodplain from when the St. Francis Dam broke in San Francisco Canyon. With us today are the owners of the property, Andy and Joyce Ponton. Andy, how long have you been up here now?
We came up here about 7 years ago.
And at the time when you arrived, you mentioned something about having some problems with people coming in here that weren't authorized, so to speak.
Well, yeah, this was a very remote area, and the teenagers used to come up here at night and have parties.
And, great place for a party.
Not for my parties. And they had a tough time getting used to the idea that this was not public property anymore, that it is private property. And so the first couple of years we were out here, we had quite a few incidences of them coming up and still wanting to party here on the property, in the cemetery.
And they were actually in here vandalizing, breaking the things up, carrying off the tombstones and that sort of thing.
I guess probably they were drinking booze and taking dope, and when you get in that condition, you don't know what you're doing. They would take tombstones, break the tombstones. Even one night they tried to dig up one of the tombs.
Strange.
That is strange. Then that's not my cup of tea.
No, I can find more exciting things to do than that.
Me too.
And as far as you're concerned, Joyce, you've had some other experiences of people that you really can't quite identify as easily as your husband Andy can, right?
Yeah, I think the time it really started, when we started noticing that there was something going on here, is when I came out one morning to feed the horses, and a big bathtub that was made out of cast iron had been moved from one direction and moved out about 10 feet and was facing in a different direction and was now in front of the gate, and it was still full of water. The corral was all sand and dirt, and if it had been drugged, it would have left prints in the ground, and there were no prints. It obviously had been picked up and moved. It took 4 men to get it off the truck and place it where it was, so it would have taken at least 5 or 6 men to have moved it to the position I found it, because it was still full of water.
Well, in the first place, there'd be no reason to move it. In the second place, there weren't any footprints or drag marks or anything.
Nothing. No.
No water even spilled.
No water even spilled.
Yeah, and then the second thing that really made me realize that there was probably some kind of a spirit here, we ended up calling the little spirit Mary. When we were painting the house, I was painting the top part of the door jamb, and I looked down, and in the wet paint close to the bottom were little fingerprints.
Wow.
And we didn't have any little children around, so there was no reason for there being little ones, little fingerprints there. I painted over them after I showed them to everybody.
You saw them too?
Yes.
They were there.
They were there.
And then there's babies crying in the night.
My daughter says that she has gotten up and walked around at night outside because she's heard a baby crying, and she'd go out to see if there was a baby outside that had maybe been abandoned or what, and she says no, that after a while it just goes away, and there is no direction that it's coming from. It's just there, like it's traveling in the air or something.
Well, none of these sounds or anything come from here in the cemetery, though, do they?
No.
Never had any ghostly visitations up here in the cemetery?
No, not that
we know of. This seems to be the most peaceful place on the property.
Well, that's strange. You would think if any place would be haunted, be up here, but it's all down there in the floor of the valley, right?
That's right.
Down there, yeah.
Well, that's interesting and kind of adds something a little unusual to our narrative here. Thank you both very much, and I want to thank you for the wonderful job you've done with this cemetery, because I can remember 10 years ago when this place was really a mess, and you guys have done a great job cleaning it up and maintaining it, and I'm sure that the people that do occasionally come up certainly appreciate it, and I want to thank you. It doesn't look like much today, but for many years this was the main north-south route you get from Los Angeles to Bakersfield. It was called the Ridge Route, built in 1915 by California Department of Transportation. The trail was actually blazed, interestingly enough, by a fellow named Lewis Clark. It cut a number of miles off the old route up San Francisco Canyon, but certainly served the community well. The Auto Club, when it opened in November of 1915, figured out there were 342 curves between Castaic and Gorman. When they added all the curves together, they came out with 97 complete circles. There are a number of places to stop up at the Tumble Inn, and of course the most impressive of all was at a place called Sandberg, a big 2-story wood-frame Swiss chalet that featured everything from gaming tables to cooperative women in the back rooms. Aha! Before that, though, before the Ridge Route, the old road led up San Francisco Canyon. This was the route of course, stagecoaches of the Camel Corps that came down from Fort Tejon, and of the Butterfield Overland Stagecoach. They would have had time, certainly, to enjoy the scenery back in those days, riding along on horseback or camelback, or in a Conestoga or in an Overland coach. The horses certainly represent those days gone by. It was between 1854, when Fort Tejon opened, and 1915, when the ridge route itself was completed, that you would actually ride horse and enjoy really the scenery just coming along. Of course, even after the Model Ts and Model As began going up the ridge route, they still had time. A lot of times they would boil over coming up here, or sometimes just stop and enjoy a little picnic lunch along the roadway. The ridge was abandoned in 1933. It was replaced by old Highway 99. Now, on the far distant side of this picture, you can see a yellow water tank that marks Highway 99. That, again, was 3 lanes. You had a center passing lane, and it existed until 1972, when finally Interstate 5 came along and bypassed 99 and the old Ridge Route. A lot of people still refer to Highway 5 as the Ridge Route, although it really isn't, or as the Grapevine, which it isn't either. It's just plain asphalt and Highway 5. This is kind of an interesting place because you're actually looking at about 70 years of automotive history right here, where the old ridge route swoops down out of the mountains and touches alongside Interstate 5. The ridge you can still drive. It's an interesting sort of side road now, and certainly not as busy as 5. It meanders through the mountains. It'll take you up to the ruins of old Sandburg, to the remains of the Tumble Inn, and any place you see a grove of pepper trees along the ridge route, there was somebody living there, or somebody had a small business. For example, the Ridge Route Garage. All that's left of that is pepper trees today. The first 7 miles are in very good shape. They're well maintained, but after that, the road gets pretty rough beyond Templin Highway. There are washouts, potholes, landslides, but with a little care and caution, you can make it, and you'll have another adventurous and exciting day traveling a historic route in old California. High on a hill overlooking Castaic Lake looms the Castaic Visitor Center. Inside are a number of articles, artifacts, and photographs relating to the State Water Project, which is the largest water delivery system anywhere in the world. And if you don't believe me, you can check that with your Guinness Book of World Records. The lake itself covers 2,300 acres, and most people come here for recreation. There's boaters and swimmers, water skiers, picnickers, but actually the lake wasn't created for that. It is a drinking water supply. It takes care of the needs of the Santa Clarita Valley, Newhall, Saugus, Valencia, Canyon Country, and actually is channeled clear over into Oxnard and down to San Diego. The lake is impounded by a dam, which you may wonder why is not concrete. Well, concrete is not exactly safe in this kind of territory. We're in the middle of 2 earthquake vaults, the San Andreas to the east of us and the San Gabriel to the west of the lake. Because of that, the earthen dam is far more suitable. It's flexible. It can move around in case of a seismic event, while concrete would crack and fall apart. The dam itself is 325 feet high, and actually if you'd slice it in half, would look something like a pyramid. It's only 45 feet across the top, while it's 2,000 across the bottom. To get all the material to build this dam, a tremendous hole was dug in the ground in front, and this hole is what created what is now known as Castaic Lagoon. Of course, long before the dam, there were a few scattered settlers back up the canyons, people with names like Cordova and DeReese. Before they arrived, a tribe of Indians, Tatavians, camped in Elderberry Canyon, and a lot of their artifacts are in display here at the Visitor Center. Castaic Lagoon, when it was created, in fact this was finished in 1972 and opened to the public in May, was all alone in the hillsides here. But you can see how it has attracted people not only for recreation but for residential use. The canyons that used to just be cattle ranches are now slowly filling up with tract homes. They started on the inner side of Interstate 5, jumped over, and are now right next to the lagoon itself. As for the property directly around the lake, that's all owned by the state of California, Department of Water Resources. So there won't be any homes directly on the lake itself, but they're sure getting close.
This morning we've been sitting here talking about what's happened from a sleepy little village to a bustling, almost city, hopefully. The people in this area have always had a rather pioneer spirit. In the mid-40s, They formed a high school district, breaking away from Los Angeles City school system. At that time, a very daring thing to do. This morning, I'm here with Connie Warden and Jerry Reynolds, and we've been talking about all of these things. Connie, why don't you bring us up to date on what's happening with the new cityhood and the population explosion?
I'll be happy to, Tom. We are today at 10,000 people in this Santa Clarita Valley. By the turn of the century, there'll be more than 200,000 people here. And still, we have no effective local government. The only government there is for the people presently in the Santa Clarita Valley is the big county of Los Angeles with more than 8 million people. We comprise only 5% of one supervisorial district. We tried in 1975 and 1976 to form our own county, which would have included all the communities here that we know so well: Newhall, Saugus, Valencia, Canyon Country, Castaic, Valverde, and even to the east, Agua Dulce. We were successful in winning the approval of the local residents, but we could not convince the rest of Los Angeles County to let us go, to let us secede, if you will. So now we're once again looking at local government, only this time with a more traditional approach, that of forming a city. And we are well on our way to having that become a reality. By 1987, there should be a vote on the issue of cityhood for the residents of City of Santa Clarita.
We tried for a while to have a county out here. You'll remember that all too well. And of course, the local vote went very much in our favor. I think like 58%, as I recall. But of course, the rest of the county said, to heck with those guys. We don't want them out of our realm, our clutches, so to speak. So the rest of the county certainly voted against it. Tried twice, didn't quite make it. And of course, we've had problems out here with toxic waste dumps and with prisons trying to be put in our midst. We've got enough prisons as it is now. But I think now that we're finally getting this vote together, and Los Angeles County will have nothing to say about whether or not we want to incorporate, I think at long last we might become the masters of our own fate, so to speak. Thank you very much, Connie, for coming around, bringing us up to date, and maybe a year from now we'll be a city. On the wall behind us is a map of the proposed cityhood formation, and it takes in a nice large area. We've come a long way across the valley from one end to the other, from Vasquez Rocks to the balcony at CalArts Institution of Higher Learning. From here you get a magnificent view out over the communities of Newhall, Saugus, and Valencia, with the dramatic framework of the San Gabriel Mountains in the background. It wasn't so very long ago, there was really nothing there. You can see how it's filling up with tract homes and shopping centers crawling their way across the valley floor. We have new buildings, the hospital, Henry Mayo Newhall Memorial Hospital. And then up on a little hill in back of us, you can see brand new housing, constantly moving, clawing its way along.
And to think that most of these changes have happened within the last 10 years, Jerry.
Yeah, really, it's been a phenomenal amount of change, as you say, and you can certainly hear the sounds of progress behind us. Speaking of change, even as we've made this film, we've seen changes. We've seen new tract homes, new shopping centers. We filmed initial adobe, that's no longer there. That's been taken out now. So change is going on even as we talk.
Remembering back when I was little, when a movie company was on the main street, it was really a big deal. Now we've got them every day, somewhere in the community.
Yeah, they're even shooting here at CalArts as we talk. I know it's coming in. Of course, people used to run out to see the stars, and now they don't pay any attention to them anymore. They just say, traffic's blocked again, and ratted movie companies.
What do you think the next 50 years will bring?
I don't know. The way things are going right now, another 50 years from now, of course, there won't be any more development. It'll all be developed. And we'll probably be like the San Fernando Valley or Orange County or something like that.
Why don't we get together in another 50 years and update this film? What do you say?
That's a date. Let's do it.
Thank you for joining us on our little walking tour through the Santa Clarita Valley. I hope you've learned as much as I learned. And I was born here, but there's always more to learn if you stop and look around.
Yes, thank you. We hope you have enjoyed this visual tour of the valley, while some of our landmarks still survive. And thanks for staying with us through all of this.